Yo, welcome to Crate 808, and today we return to our series looking at who had the best 3-album run in 90s hip-hop, and to help kick us off, we've got a very special guest in the hot seat, writer and journalist from LA. We've got Max Bell in the house. How are you doing, my man?
I'm doing well, man. I really appreciate you having me. This is a great honor.
But, you know, I appreciate the Troutman wax poetics behind you. That's what I appreciate. I'm sure we're going to be going into that. And man, thank you for coming on, and, you know, just let's chop it up about Quik. Why not? We're going to go into that run. 1991's Quik Is the Name, 1992's Way Too Funky, and 1995 Safe and Sound. But I'm sure we're going to talk about Rhythm-al-ism as well. But before we do, Max, I have to ask you what I ask everyone who comes on the pod. Max, what is the least hip-hop thing you've done in the last 24 hours?
I knew you were going to ask, because I've listened to a few episodes, and the least hip-hop thing I've done in the last 24 hours is last night I put on a deep sea clay mud mask, so that way my skin, you know, would look somewhat better, because you don't have any makeup team. You got to set that up on your end.
We don't have a second unit out there to do makeup. That is the thing. Man, I love that. I don't think anyone's looked after their skin before coming on. You're already in the Annals Hall of Fame, man. You put a face mask on for the show.
Hip-hop, it's not very hip-hop to be into skincare, you know? And I feel, and I've only gotten into it of late, you know?
Oh.
As I'm aging, I'm like, I should have been doing this a long time ago.
I'm just glad we can hit up skincare. Because we're going to talk about hairs generally, because Quik's hair is peak, like top 5 hair in hip hop. So we're going to go there, but we've got skin in there as well, skincare as well. Come to us for all this. I love it, man. Max, thank you for bringing that. I'm going to note that down as one of the best I've had. But we're going to go in, man. Like Quik. First of all, I was going to ask you really about this run we're going to talk about. What is it that you think that maybe this has got as a contender for like best run of that decade of the 90s? What is it about this run, do you think, generally?
I think the most salient thing in regard to that question is the evolution that takes place from album to album to album. So it is not just a 3-album run wherein he's refining one thing and perfecting it over the course of that, and we're getting a lot of, you know, the same things, but he's evolving as a musician and as a writer, and as a human over the course of those albums, in good ways and bad. There are some interesting things that we'll eventually touch on there. And then it's all the more remarkable because he caps it with what I think would put him above everyone else that you would have, which is a stellar 4th album. So there's that to consider. It's like, okay, yeah, we can compare him to everybody else within a 3-album run, but once we get down to it, it's like, if we were to come into a tie with somebody else that you would put in that 3-album category, the tie break might be, well, he continued to make great records and they didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard enough to manage that 3-album, right? But there's only a few who've got that 4th. I think Della might be in there because of the 80s. I suppose you could put that in there. But yeah, no, absolutely, man. And I was going to say, even Balance and Options, even that has got that you know, cult. Like, I've noticed people love that album, man. So yeah, I would say Quik definitely with that 3. Is there a context to your experience of Quik, though? Like, personally for you, how did you find out about him? What fascinated him about you? Do you know what I mean? Why did you fall for him, if you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I was 12 years old, and I listened to a lot of LA radio, so I'm sure that at that point, I mean, this is 2002, so I'm sure at that point I was cognizant of him on like a subconscious level, you know, having listened to like just whatever was on Power 106, and I knew who Dr. Dre was because, you know, The Chronic 2001 was a huge album for me. It was like the first record that I like swiped from a friend's older brother. And so then I got this, which I have placed right here.
Love that.
That record is, I bought that CD when I was 12 years old. My neighbor, shout out to Matt Sawaya, was really into rap and was a rapper himself. And he took me to Aaron's Records in Los Angeles, which, rest in peace, Aaron's Records was a very foundational, like important record store for the Los Angeles beat scene, which some people know as it relates to Low End Theory. It was kind of a breeding ground and a meeting ground for a lot of those guys before they had a place to go and play. Like Koopma was there. A lot of really interesting cats were there. Shout out to Koopma, by the way, because this is a UK podcast, and I think he's out that way. So my friend Matt told me that I should buy this record, and I remember putting it on, and everyone that's probably listening to this knows the first song is Sweet Black Pussy, and you're a 12-year-old to hear that, you're like, wow, this is this is more than I bargained for, but it's everything that I wanted. And so I think it was the raunchiness and the directness that hit me in a way that appeals to a very juvenile sense of humor and a very juvenile, just like, point of view when you're 12 years old. But once you get past that, I think it stuck with me because he was such an incredible MC and wrote. We can talk more about that as we get into it. And then, as my history with Quik goes on, I start to get really into Zapp, just on their own, from having listened to rap my entire life. Zapp becomes one of the most important groups in my life as I become more and more invested in music. So much so that I have like a giant wheat paste Zapp poster that is being framed, and it's going to take up my entire wall.
Amazing. But you got through Zapp through Quik. You got through. Yeah,
pretty much. I would say like I knew about Troutman from California Love.
For sure.
And then Quik comes into the picture, and I'm like, oh, I'm hearing, what's this song? Like, this sounds very familiar. And it was like Heard It Through the Grapevine, on which I think is When You're a G. I'd have to check my notes. But
okay. Wow. I love how you went back, to go and actually then fall in love with someone like Zapp. It's amazing. I know friends who've done that with Telephonics, like, generally because of the samples you hear and people fall into that, love into that, the soul of that. Just fascinating to me, because when you said there about Sweet Black Pussy being the opening track, kind of, it is that juvenile thing to it. There is this unbelievable crudeness to Quik, I find anyway. And it comes from a place, where that's his life and he wants to have fun and make fun music. But it's so easy to just shroud the actual ridiculous talent that he has. Like, just speaking on the talent, like, I was just reading up on Quik and, just kind of like finding out how he emerged. And it's just really amazing to see, like, blokes just going around to their house to see him mix. And to see him mix 3 things instead of 2 things. And you think, wow, like, this guy, what I found amazing was that then he was like homeless at 16. And I find
one of 10 children in Compton, and his mom worked like several jobs, and then she dipped to Louisiana, I believe, for reasons that I don't know that I've ever found out, like what her rationale for leaving was, or why she was comfortable leaving him in LA. I think he wanted to stay because that's, he was DJing at the time, so that's where he was making his money. He was probably, I don't know if he was selling tapes of his mixes just yet, because I know that comes for sure a little bit later with the red tape. But he was homeless, and then he hooked up with Playa Ham and Tweed Cadillac of Penthouse Players Clique, and they took him in, and he lived with them while he was making the red tape. Yeah.
And what I find at such a young age, you can have the talent and you can have the, the X factor, the enigma. And then I think, God, how easy it is to lose that, through circumstance. Yet the fact that he didn't, it showed this mental fortitude to Quik that I didn't really think about before until I started reading more about his childhood. I just thought it must reflect in his work, in his art, and in his creative expression. And I was just thinking, it does reflect actually in a lot of this stuff that, although it is crude, it can be juvenile, although the lyrics are incredibly badly dated. Something like that Sweet Black Pussy, when you hear that, the magic trick he pulls with like the sonic bounce of it all and a guitar riff that he, by the way, just side note, DJ Quik uses the fucking best guitar licks and flutes, I've now noticed. And it's like, yeah, everything he does with that, and obviously Robert Bacon being, you know, key to that. But I find that really interesting, how his mental fortitude is, yeah, I'm going to still have fun, but I'm also going to make this one of the most ridiculously well-produced tracks, which, as you said, he evolves into almost becoming a composer, I suppose, or like an arranger, if you know what I mean. But yeah, sorry, as we were saying about that album, tell me more about that album. For Quik Is the Name, you saying you fell in love with it. What was it about it? Why was it so pioneering to you? Like, what was it?
I think part of it was that it, in many respects, it felt ahead of its time with the musicianship from records of that era. I mean, it comes out almost 2 years before The Chronic, and I would argue that it stacks up against that in the production. It's different, but I would argue that it's equally robust, and that there were things that Quik did that Dre could not do in 92.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit, just to compare the two styles?
Sure. I mean, you know, I believe Jeff Weiss touched on this a little bit when he was on talking about Sugar Free, which is that Quik always seemed more invested in the 80s funk, soul, and R&B, which, you know, that at part of that time, it got classified as like boogie. I think that was the overarching term for some of that music. And a lot of those boogie records have this really like somber and like sweet R&B bent. And Quik has that. Like Tonight, which, you know, we can talk about at length, the single from Quik Is the Name, samples Clear's Tonight, Clear with 3 E's, which was a band from the 70s that went into the 80s. And when they got into the 80s, they started making the more, you know, synth R&B leaning boogie music. And that's what he samples for Tonight. And I think that carries throughout that record, whereas Dre is very much more on the Parliament Funkadelic stuff, which is zanier, and he's got the squealing synths and all that stuff. And Quik was capable of that, but I think he went in a different direction. I don't know that Dre was capable of pulling off like musical nuance in the way that Quik was. There's so many layers to every production on there, and not that there aren't layers on Dre, but they seem to be far easier to pick apart. Whereas Quik, it's so perfectly melded that it becomes harder and harder to discern where he's pulling from what.
Yeah, man, that's really well put, because I could not I was just thinking about subtlety, and I thought like Dre's music didn't have as much subtlety. There was moments of it, but I suppose it's a bit like listening to the layers of the music, I suppose, if you really want to put it that way. And I just think like, God damn, like Quik was just unbelievable with that. And like, even if he's repeating the same, which a lot of young artists can do, you know, repeat the same mode. Like so Sweet Black Pussy being one, and then Loped Out Hood being another, you could say he's still so different in those two tracks. And I was like, wow, but it could quite easily, those two ring the same bells for me, if you know what I mean, in my head. And the other thing I was thinking about, you were saying there about his rapping, which I think gets kind of shitted on. I do think that. And I also think that it gets better as he goes, though. Like, you can completely see how better he gets by the time he gets Safe and Sound. But I was thinking with this, what I actually enjoyed about him is what I loved about Snoop when I grew up, which was he immediately stood out for doing, amid all this crudeness and juvenile stuff, he was like, the way he's rapping on Sweet Black Pussy, and then he interrupts it and goes, oh, I lost myself, and then comes back in saying those words with extra emphasis, just to really be like a fuck you, this is, you know, what I'm talking about, and it being so loud and abrasive. But the way he's rapping before that, he's like, just almost like it's like a new character he's made up. And I just thought for someone like Quik, you can say all this stuff you want. His stuff is hardly ever boring. It's not boring. Do you know what I mean?
No, and even though it is juvenile to a degree, like there's nothing wrong with sending up black pussy. There's just nothing wrong with that.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Are you going to say that it's bad? Like, so you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing wrong with that as like a statement saying that it's a good thing. Like that's positive,
and it comes from a place of love from him, right? Like I've heard it came from a place of love from him,
and it's not a fetishization thing because it's like he's coming from that community, so it's like, and this was at a time in the '90s when like the idea of like the black body being a beautiful thing was like coming into the fore, so that's important in some respects. Like as juvenile as it is, like he's still sending out a positive message about like the beautifulness of black women at a time when like white was the thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. I'm glad you said that as well. And I think like there's moments on this album, and I'm not sure how you think this album may be perceived. Like, do you think it's overvalued? Do you think it's undervalued? Where do you think it stands? Like generally in hip hop heads, where do you think that this stands?
I mean, it's a loaded question because I think his entire catalog is undervalued. I think him as a person is undervalued. I think people don't even realize his influence in so many respects. And I think to answer that question and also to touch on his writing, which you mentioned, and that being kind of undervalued historically, Tonight, just as a single, is flawless from the production standpoint and then also from the writing standpoint. I mean, you have a song that details an entire weekend of partying, and it showcases like the realism and the naturalism that runs throughout Quik's catalog, which I think is why people maybe talk shit about him, is that his phrasing is so naturalistic. You feel as though he's talking to you, and there aren't a lot of punchlines, there aren't a lot of involved metaphors, but his choice of verbs, his choice of nouns, they all evoke what is happening. You can see every scene, and in a song like Tonight, he gives you the mundane, from soaking in the tub and putting on his cologne and his Givenchy sweatsuit, to the highs, smoking, shooting dice. And then it comes the lows. We get the hangover and the hangover recovery and the rally to party once more. And it has an entire narrative arc in a rap single, a radio single. And there's a deep groove also in the middle of that. So he allows for his musicianship to take center stage, which I think is something that he always tries to do on so many records, where he's like, I've just rapped and now I'm going to show you everything that was buried by my rapping because it means so much to me and I put so much into it.
Yeah.
And all of that is included on a song that was number 3 on the rap charts. And I think the writing is actually fantastic. You'd be hard pressed to say, oh, that was a wasted line, that was a line that didn't show me anything about this narrator, or that didn't show me visually what is happening. You can see every scene of that. I mean, it may be mundane to you, but to me, it sounds like a 21-year-old who had a great weekend and a little bit of a battle with a hangover,
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love how you've put that. And I'm just thinking of things when you're saying that the words he uses. I think, isn't it on Born and Raised in Compton where he says something like Dame Bramage or something? And I was like, what the hell is Dame Bramage? And as a kid, it's so, but it's cool. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Even, obviously, it probably isn't a mistake, but even if it is, it doesn't matter. That kind of stuff is what makes the art. And and I just feel like there's moments in this that have all of that. And I was wondering, you were saying there about, it's a bit of a loaded question, and he is a little bit, he is like unsung. Why? What would you put that down to? What do you think? Why do you think that is?
I've puzzled over this for years. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I often wonder if it is that the shadow that Dr. Dre cast was so large that other people were, for lack of a better word at this moment, overshadowed. So, and Quik was a contemporary, right? And Dre got a lot of coverage. I mean, if you look at like all the source coverage he got, all the rap pages coverage, he was in Rolling Stone, he was on LA Weekly,
MTV.
MTV. But I don't know that Quik had nearly as much. Like I have some stuff in my archives. I have like a digital archive of rap journalism over the years. And like Quik had a feature, like a very short Q&A for Quik Is the Name in the Source in 91. Which is great. And I posted it on my Twitter, so people can find it if they just like do at VMaxB, 2 E's, and Quik. You should be able to find that entire interview posted in high res.
Nice.
Because I just wanted people to see how brilliant he was at 21, where he's talking about how much music he's studying, how he reads all the instruction manuals for the equipment that he purchases. His shout out to Jim Morrison, because people talk a lot of shit about Jim Morrison, and I'm a Doors fan.
That's amazing. I never knew that. That's amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff there. But I say all that to say, like, there's a huge gap. There's very little coverage that I could find in Way Too Funky era, and I wonder if that was because Way Too Funky drops, and then like at the same time Dre is coming out with the singles for the Chronic, and so bam, there you go, huge shadow. Yeah. And then we see Quik getting like a full feature in the Source in 95 around Safe and Sound, which, you know, obviously had the MC8 stuff going on at the time. So I think people were a little bit more invested. But I also think that Quik's music is a much more personal music than Dr. Dre's music is. Dr. Dre's music is, I'm riding around, I got the strap, you know, weed, women, whatever. And Quik has that stuff, but so much of it is a first person, like very specific to him. If you don't want to know what's going on in Quik's life, then you're going to be sorely disappointed when you turn on his albums, because every one of them has songs that are very personal. All the, like throughout his whole career. I mean, there's songs where he's reflecting on like girls that he dated in high school. You know, that never or wanted to date, because I'm thinking of some songs on Rhythm-al-ism that never made it in Dre's canon. And I do think that like Dre just has a baseline palatability for people who aren't looking for more personal revelation in their rap music. And I think that that may be ultimately what hampered Quik, and maybe the complexity of the musicianship. You know, some people aren't willing to have that much instrumentation going on beneath the vocals, whereas Dre didn't rap as much. There was a lot of space between words.
Yeah, no, brilliantly put, Max, absolutely. And yeah, it's just fascinating to know that's what world he was in. He was a contemporary. He was, you know, they went on to just take over, and that's why I always respect someone like Cypress Hill and, you know, Predator, and like Ice Cube's Predator, and all this stuff was dropping, you know, in the wake or amid it. And I always think it's nice that these albums stood out above the law, all these people. And I think what's interesting to me as well is what shoulders he was rubbing at this stage anyway. You said there about Jim Morrison, his influences go over. I was watching a doc, and he was talking about meeting Guns N' Roses. I was like, what, with Eazy-E? And I was like, damn, like that was like, for a young person to be with bands who are like, you know, top number one, you know, in the Billboard. It's just wonder how it just made him just think, do you know what, I'm just going to push this as far as I can. And I was going to move on to Way Too Funky, but before I do, there are some tracks on Quik Is the Name that just generally need a shout out. But I was wondering for you if there's any hidden gems or like rewindable moments, apart from Tonight maybe, you know, that you are just can't stop rewinding. Is there anything on that album that you think deserves a shout out before we move on?
Sure. And I got 3, so hopefully I can run through it real quick.
100%. Take your time, man.
Born and Raised in Compton is an obvious one, but I'm shouting it out for a very specific reason. And that is that, you know, we were talking about the writing of DJ Quik and him being kind of undervalued. And there's the part in Born and Raised in Compton where he's talking about his equipment getting jacked. Someone had stole his production equipment, his livelihood, right? And so then as a writer and as a producer at the same time, he goes, so here's some bass in your face, motherfucker, silly sucker. And that he's timing it, all of his words, with the hitting of the bass drum. And then he continues to go on, like, motherfucker, silly sucker, ass clucker, now you're ducking because you can't stop a brother like the Quiks do. And like, there's a lot of intricate stuff going on there syllabically, and it bothers me when people don't acknowledge that he was capable of doing that kind of thing. And that kind of leads into my first hidden gem, which is Deep, which features some of Quik's fastest, most technical, and most in-the-pocket verses outside of Tear It Off, which I don't really care for. No. Tear It Off, it would probably be the one that I would skip. Although I will say, if there's ever a track that might suggest that Quik would have been a great jungle or garage producer, it would be Tear It Off, because that shit is super fast.
Right, Max, let me just stop you there, because I was going to say the same thing. I heard Tear It Off again, and I was like, why does this remind me of Fatboy Slim? Or like, it almost reminds me of like, over here, DJ Format made music like that early doors, but also just that house scene, that jungle scene. I was like, yeah, he could have done it. He definitely, that's an example. And although you might not care for it, as an like from UK, it's like, whoa, this kid from the US is tapping into a sound that's huge here. And it's kind of mind-boggling, man. Yeah, absolutely.
It really is. I listened to it the other day. You were absolutely correct, and I like it on a from a production standpoint. Purely, I love it. I mean, there's I don't think I can name a Quik track where I'm like, that was a bad beat. Yeah, that just doesn't. It really doesn't exist for me. But it is fascinating that I wonder, and it would be amazing to ask him if he was listening to Jungle, if he was listening to House at the time, because it's there. It was just lyrically, that one doesn't do as much for me. I think he's going a little bit faster than he's capable of. Not to say that he can't go fast, but I think he's just a little bit back. The other hidden gem, which for me, I mean, maybe it isn't hidden, is the Bomb Bud. I have a soft spot for my heart in that one, even though he's got the fake and Jamaican accent.
We have to talk about this.
Hasn't aged very well. It was very much of its time. A lot of 90s rap had reggae, doing their
He kept doing it though. He kept doing it. Rhythm-al-ism. It's like, man, I love you, Quik, but I don't know. I just can't do fake patois. But I've heard many things about Bomb Bud, good and bad. So I'm here for the good. I'm absolutely here for the good.
I just think that on a production level, he was also capable of making reggae. Yeah. Like, he was capable of making dub music. I mean, there's echoes of Lee Scratch Perry in that one, and Bomb Bud 2 that comes on Rhythm-al-ism 2. And I think that's what it is for me. Is like, I get that you're kind of like poking fun at the patois, and like, that's not really that cool in hindsight, but I don't know, maybe Quik has Jamaican ancestry. I don't know.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It is a very fascinating track that people kind of just are so split on it. And I'm on it's a skip for me, but as a kid, I'd let that play. I wasn't like, it's only as it's aged, that kind of thing. Can I just give a shout out to Quik's Groove though? Because I know he has a series of it, but I think the original, this one, even on obviously the dedication, but man, that for me is probably my favourite track off this album now. And only because I play it so much. And it just, as you said earlier, he's ready to say, I've just done my amazing spitting. Now I'm going to give you space and see what I can do with this. And you're just like, wow. And I love where he went with it. As in, he just went really R&B at times. And it really pissed my mates off who were backpackers or, Timberlands. And they were like, what the fuck is this? It's like, no, it's fucking great. This is what art is. It shouldn't be, boom bap, same drums. It should be this, So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, and I'm so glad you said that, because I really wanted to talk about it. It's perfect for me, actually. I think it's where the album should have ended. I think it's a perfect close to a tight, unskippable 10-track album. Like, there's nothing that me personally that I would skip before that. And then everything after, Tear It Off, I Got That Feeling, Scandalous, all feel kind of out of place. Not that they're bad records, but they just all feel kind of out of place. Like, they couldn't fit in the sequencing anywhere else. So he was like, I'll just throw them here at the end. I Got That Feeling has aged really poorly and is just juvenile and boring, and it doesn't even like cohere with Quik. Like, he's always seemed very sure of himself when it comes to women, and to me he seems like he's putting on there in a way that doesn't feel genuine or assured. Scandalous is a posse record that's like just testosterone driven nut grabbing, and it just isn't that good. And again, doesn't feel true to like who Quik was. I mean, he was a very confident man, but I don't think he was like a very braggartly man in many respects. But I would play Quik's Groove on loop for an hour if I could, and not have any qualms about it. I think it's brilliant. And I know we'll probably talk about him a little more, but all of them going forward, 1, 2, and 3, on each of these records, respectively, all pair really well together. If you listen to them in sequence, they are all within the same vein. It's very clear that he knew that if you played them simultaneously, or not simultaneously, but in sequence, that they would work perfectly. And they're all in that, like you said, that down-tempo R&B, like deep soul vein. And I know you're from the UK, but any LA person that's listening would say, yeah, those records could play on 94.7 The Wave, which is like our adult LA like contemporary station, which plays like your Michael McDonald. It plays stuff in that kind of vein, and I guarantee you those could fit right in the mix. You could slip one in there and nobody would know the difference. And it's amazing, and it's still good, and it's like I don't know, I'm so baffled when people don't enjoy the Quik screws.
Yeah, this is 1991. Want of a better word, it is gangster rap, but it's not really gangster. It is, do you know what I mean? Like it's weird. It shares some characteristics as in the local community and stuff like that, but it's really not in what he says and stuff. So it's just fascinating we're saying this about a 1991 record on the West Coast like that. It's just amazing. So before we do go though, Quik Is the Name. I was listening to the remix as well. Obviously, it's great, and there's a few remixes I think that are really good. But the OG on Quik Is the Name, and I just spotted it today where I was like, oh shit, they're fucking bongos. Like I think he's using bongos on there, and the dynamism of this fucking instrumentalist is unbelievable. So yeah, no, even now you're catching things where I'm like, I've heard Quik Is the Name hundreds of times, but yeah, amazing.
Before we go, I know you can edit this, so maybe it'll get cut. No big deal.
Yeah. No.
I wanted to touch on your point about it being associated with gangster rap, but not really being gangster rap. And he touches on that in that Source interview that I mentioned a little bit earlier in the episode from 91, where he's like, I am not making gangster rap music. I'd click right now, but for the sake of time, I won't click. But what I wanted to say about that also is that if you look at the cover of the album, it's kind of saying that he isn't. Like, so if you look at the black hat, that is a non-gang affiliated hat. Black was a safe color to wear in Los Angeles, and there was no logo on it that identified him with a particular gang. So, and he's also wearing a black t-shirt. So he's wearing neutral colors. He's making sure to note visually, I am not a gang member. I don't affiliate with gangs. And therefore, like, this is just a very Los Angeles look that I have. I mean, he's got the Jerry curl, which was huge coming out of the 80s. He's got the gold chain. And again, as I said, black was a safe color to wear in a lot of neighborhoods. Yeah.
I'm just looking at it now. I even love the font. I even love how the font, plays with just the colours of the whole scheme. It's beautiful. It's a brilliant album cover. I love it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what's so fascinating about it is it's kind of like this sepia-toned record cover that already looks as if it exists in the past. So whoever designed the cover, whoever was involved with that, whether Quik was making those decisions, I don't know offhand, almost knew, like, this is a moment in Los Angeles culture. He looks exactly as people from this city look in 91. So when anyone looks at this, they will think, oh, that's 91 based on the sepia tone and when the album came out. And there's no chance of you thinking it's a modern record. Yeah. Like, it's almost as if they expected people to come back to it for generations. Yeah. And that's what's kind of brilliant about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Red Tape as well had that same thing, didn't it? So it's like, yeah, and I know we haven't talked about too much about the Red Tape, but, was it 87? So yeah, like, he's been in it. He's been doing it, before he releases this. So yeah.
DJ since 81. He was DJing since 81, I believe.
Damn, that's crazy. What the years he's put in. But you can hear it, especially when you go to something like Way Too Funky, a year and a bit later, Way Too Funky, 1992. I know Rob Bacon got involved at this point. But where were you? What do you think about his album? How do you think he had evolved? What were the themes that maybe continued and maybe discontinued for Quik?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. I think this is probably the most overlooked record in his catalog, if I had to pick one. And I think there's cause for that, given that a lot of it is kind of a retread of themes that he touched on with Quik Is the Name.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a major evolutionary shift in terms of his writing and in terms of his production. And like you alluded to, he starts working with Robert Bacon, who I believe was doing a lot of guitar and bass work on this record. And that pays dividends on a record, especially like just like Compton. Robert Bacon's all over the guitar on that, Quik on the drums, and then there's those amazing Christmas bells that seem to make it into every rap record in the early 90s.
But the way he uses them is fascinating. I love how he just put them in.
It's fantastic. They're inspired. It doesn't feel cheesy. It works beautifully in the mix. But like you said, it does kind of come back to a lot of themes that he's, touched on before, or just a lot of type of records that he's done before. Like we get another reggae record with Me Wanna Rip Your Girl, which just isn't very good. I like it. But if DJ Quik made a Jesse's Girl, shout out to Rick Springfield, it would probably be Me Wanna Rip Your Girl. Just like, you really want to be compared to Rick Springfield.
What a marriage. I didn't think about that, but yeah, fair enough. Jesse's Girl, yeah. But yeah, no, absolutely. But you said there about, I think the one thing that you can give him is his honesty on the mic at times, and even it's on Only for the Money, where he does say, I'm fucking bored of this dirty talk, and he puts the onus completely on the listener, and he's like, this is what sells, this is what you guys want, so I'm going to make it. And it's like, oh yeah, he hasn't grown into that, where you get to Rhythm-al-ism, where it's like, oh no, it doesn't really matter. This is, what's it say on the cover of Rhythm-al-ism? This is 70 minutes of commercial-free music or something. Yeah. And it's like, he's just like, this is what I want to do, and it's beautiful music, and way too funky. It's just interesting how he does make that disclaimer in the album, because it stood out to me. Just as a kid, I was like, oh yeah, he is right.
I'm glad you touched on that, because in re-listening in preparation for today, that was something that I singled out as well. And I think you can kind of see, he's still capitulating to the demands of the record industry and of his fan base at that time, fan bases who probably really love Sweet Black Pussy and wanted more of it. I'm sure he got that all the time when fans talked to him. And he was probably beyond it, like you said, and like he says on the album, like, this is for you guys. But we also have to remember, this is 92. He is only like 2 years removed from living with Playa Ham and Tweed Cadillac. Like, he was virtually homeless. So he's doing exactly what he needs to do to continue to sell, while also telling you, I know what I'm doing, and I'm just waiting until I have enough money so I don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah.
Which is wildly risky in some respects, actually.
And then still taking things he has done and almost forcing the listener to listen to a guitar solo in gangster rap, or not gangster rap, in West Coast rap like that, when it's like P-Funk, and you're like, I think it's when you're a G, and I was like, oh my God, I love this. He's just gone into, here's a guitar solo. And I don't remember ever hearing stuff like that when I got to the point where I was like, even if he is doing that, this is where he was circumstantially, he still was pushing that boat. We talked about Quik's Groove at number 2 on here, for you to rip to. That is like, you could play that, as you said, like, windpipes and DJ Quik, match made in heaven, let's go. And I just think that is a moment as well where he's allowed to just do, what could now be played in self-help retreats. That track, you could put it on and you're like, that has the flute, right? Like, that has the crazy flute, and it again strikes that strange balance between, like, it's kind of sad. There's like a somberness and soulfulness to those records, those Quik's Grooves, where you're just like, I think he's a little sadder than he lets on in his music, in his lyrics, rather, in his lyrics. And there was a lot of tragedy in Quik's life that, like, we can maybe talk about at some point. But Yeah, no, absolutely. I know. Obviously, he lost. There's quite a few people he's lost, and I do want to talk about Marsberg and people like that like later, just to touch on some of these, artists that never got to fulfill the potential that people saw. But there were moments on here. Obviously, we have to mention the MC8 stuff, the Tim Dog stuff, Penicillin for Wax, and I just thought on Way Too Funky, it was just the makings of a diss track that I think it's like a foundation to then when he makes like Dollars and Cents, which I'd said to Jeff when he came on is probably one of my most perfect tracks, even if it is a diss track and it comes from that energy of dissing someone. Jesus Christ, when you think about that track. But we're going to go into Safer Sound in a bit. But hearing Way Too Funky, it's interesting how he then went from that and built on that and almost included tracks like that a lot. I mean, where did you stand that whole beef thing? I mean, I don't know. Did it engage you enough as a kid? Were you like into it?
I think I was kind of ignorant of it when doing my first round of quick listens. I mean, I think Dollars and Cents, it makes it so plain. We'll talk about the line on that song.
Yeah.
That line makes it so plain that you can't but help research into it. And I think that was the initial I need to look into what precipitated this diss. But I wasn't that cognizant of it on Way Too Funky, and I think that's just from my ignorance listening to Quik for the first time and not knowing the history, because by the time I'd gone back to all these records, he was already in Balance and Options territory by the time I got to Quik. So everything that I was listening to, because I'm 30 years old, so everything I was listening to was a retrospective look on it. I did my due diligence, so I knew what his contemporary sounded like and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as an album now, when you listen to it, is it something that you find a lot of more rewindable moments or hidden gems on this one? Is there stuff where you think actually that needs a bit more love, like you said with Deep and on the first album?
I don't know that Just Like Compton will ever get its proper due.
Interesting.
As a rap song, it's brilliant. As a tour diary, he's telling you what's happening in every city that he has gone to, to tour the previous album. He's illustrating the influence that Los Angeles West Coast rap is having, and by proxy, West Coast gang culture is having on all of these hoods throughout the U.S. And I think it's a really salient record because it's on a subtextual level, it's saying the governmental neglect, the societal neglect that bred everything that I knew in Compton is creating the exact same circumstances in other states and other cities. And so that's why I think Just Like Compton is a brilliant record. There's also, like we said, the instrumentation with Robert Bacon on guitar. And then, I will end there.
Yeah, no, mate, absolutely. And I'm glad you said that because even with the video and everything about that, again, his videos have been amazing. Visually, I mean, Tonight is just a visually stunning video. I love that. But we're talking about visually stunning, man. We've got to talk about the album cover because Way Too Funky, right? I was looking at just looks, and as a kid, Safe and Sound was the iconic poster or tee I wanted. But when I now look at Way Too Funky again and again, and I have it here, it's just like that is probably the best DJ Quik look, I feel. I don't know where you come with it if you're going to power rank his looks, but he's looking fucking cool there. And I was like, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like that album cover. I love it. So I don't know where you think aesthetically. He was thinking, though, more about his looks, I feel, at this point, right?
Yeah. No, I think he was. I mean, again, that first record that's right behind me, Quik Is the Name, I think that was an homage to the neighborhood that he comes from. The gold chain, the black t-shirt, the black hat. That's such an LA look. You can walk different parts of Los Angeles and still see that exact look today.
Damn.
And I'm wearing a Sox hat, which was a neutral hat. I'm not like a huge Sox fan, but it's associated with LA rap forever.
Wow.
So that kind of stuff. And then the cover that you mentioned, Way Too Funky, the black and the blue interplay is brilliant. And I think says a lot for somebody that, at the time, he was trying to I think break with the ties of the gang that was in his neighborhood, which would have been the Treetop Pyrus, which is a blood set. And he's got blue on his outfit, and he's got blue on his album cover, and like that was, he had to know what that meant in '92.
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it? And it's these little things that, there is some subtlety to it. And I was looking back at, like, you were saying about, like, this is the most overlooked album. There's stuff like on End Still Tripping where I was like, this sounds like a Prince record. He's almost going into Prince territory now. And you're like, damn, he really is. And and this is completely personal experience. Maybe I've got this completely wrong, but I was listening to No Bullshit. And the first thing that came to my head after re-listening to it was, oh yeah, I forgot, this sounds, I don't know if you remember Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles brought a track out called Power in the 90s, right? And it was Turtle Power. That's what I can't remember who the rapper was, but it was massive here. And it sounds like that bloke who made Power has just listened to DJ Quik. And I was like, oh my fucking God. Like his roots are everywhere. Like his tentacles are everywhere. And then I saw the Source gave it four mics, which as a kid, fuck me, 4 mics, I'm buying that album and I'm probably going to be rinsing that album. And Quik was way before my experience with it, and I didn't get to listen to Way Too Funky. Yeah, I'd listened to Safe and Sound and Quik Is the Name, and I'd overlooked this album, funnily enough. So it is one of them that kind of sits like that in his catalogue, I feel.
Yeah, and again, I think it's really just like, I think Deep Cover had come out by that time, 187. So I think people were really checking for Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. And this hits right before The Chronic, I believe. I believe Quik gets 2 albums in between Dre leaving NWA and making The Chronic. He gets 2 albums in. And it also, to put it in sociological context, for where people's heads might have been at. Again, I wasn't there. I was 2 years old, so this is purely historical perspective, is that the Rodney King stuff is happening in 92, kind of around the time that Way Too Funky comes out. Dre allegedly recorded part of The Chronic as people were looting, around that time. So I do wonder if like just the lens on the West Coast was only focused on what was happening on a street level, on a political level, as opposed to what music was coming out of there for that period of time, which would have really obscured Way Too Funky in the public consciousness.
And that's why Predator banged at that point as well, because I think that came out in 92, and that had the whole, we're going to tear it, fucking roof up, tear it up and all that shit. Absolutely, yeah. So I do completely get that he came out in that midst. When it comes to something like Safe and Sound then, 1995, few years down the line, he's had a lot of time to, hone his craft even more. Suge Knight is exec, producer, Mobbed Out, cover. Where did you stand on Safe and Sound? Like, where does that stand? What has changed for Quik in all those years?
It's so fascinating because I think so many people, like Suge Knight, converted so many people into like the dark side, if you will, for a brief period of time. I think some stuff had happened to Quik. I think he'd lost a couple people between 92 and 95. I can't remember during what period in his life that it might have been Rhythm-al-ism. I may be getting my history incorrect here. During Rhythm-al-ism, he lost his nephew and his manager / friend who he grew up with. His nephew, in a drug-induced rage, shot and killed his best friend from childhood. And so his nephew went to prison. So that was Rhythm-al-ism. So but it's interesting. I brought up Rhythm-al-ism, I think, because if you contrast, like to talk about Safe and Sound, I think you have to compare and contrast, right? You have all of this, more thugged out, gang centric Quik, probably the most of his career on Safe and Sound. And then you compare that to 3 years later, Rhythm-al-ism, Use a Gangsta. No, I'm not.
Yeah.
So, and on the cover, right, because we've been kind of dissecting these covers, the Safe and Sound cover is the first cover where he's wearing red, which would align him with
Treetop
Bloods, and I believe, because there's press photos from that time that have him wearing a Phillies hat. I believe the hat on the cover is also a Phillies hat, which it is a favored hat of the treetop Pyrus, the P of the Phillies standing for Pyru. So
Right.
I think he was very clearly, I think he also, what's interesting about that cover now that we're talking about it in light of him potentially kind of like moving into the more gang affiliated stuff, you know, Suge was affiliated with the Bloods, the Bounty Hunters specifically, I believe. Quik is blurry on that cover. And I wonder if that like visually signifies him being conflicted about what is going on this record.
Interesting.
Like he's not sure. The world is blurry. A lot of bad things are happening. This is the East Coast, West Coast beef is happening at this time. I wonder how, if he chose a blurry photograph on purpose.
Yeah. Because I think it was his security card. I think his name's Bundy that had passed at this point as he was recording this. And it was like, damn, like, you're right. This pain is definitely there, and he's transformed it into rage at times. And I do think there's such virtuosity in this album where you're like, damn, he is just, I think it's almost like a different person to Way Too Funky when I listen to it now. It's just the evolution's amazing. But one thing I was going to ask you, maybe you can enlighten me a bit more about it because I don't know enough about it. But you said there about him going and making this album. I have heard there are reports that he had another album he'd made and he just didn't like it and deleted all the masters and destroyed the masters. And then he made Safe and Sound. And I'm like...
That hurts to hear.
I am sorry for hurting that cut deep, I know. But it's just fascinating to know where that would have been, you know?
Oh, yeah. And I to that end, I believe there's, if you look on the internet, there are some unreleased stuff from that era.
Right.
It's called the Death Row Sessions EP. If you guys want to find it, listeners, the Death Row Sessions EP has some unreleased Quik stuff. There's a track called Bounce, which may exactly be one of the tracks that he might have tried to delete, but somebody got a hold of. And that is fantastic. And I think illustrates my favorite thing about this record, sonically, this record being Safe and Sound, is that so much of it is his interpretation of the man over my left shoulder here, Roger Troutman. And that's because they met in Vegas in '94 when he was on tour with Robert Bacon, and Troutman like came backstage, and according to Quik and Bacon, there's a great documentary that people can watch, the Unsung episode of the BET Unsung series with DJ Quik. I would recommend, or Visual-ism, which is like his tour diary around the early 2000s. But I think on either one of those, I can't quite recall, he and Robert Bacon both elucidate how in about 20 minutes, Roger Troutman kind of flipped their heads and made them rethink everything they thought about music within just a short period. Like he picked up, like he had Robert Bacon play something on the guitar, and then Roger picked up the guitar and completely freaked it and like just blew his mind. And so then maybe it was a result of that, possibly, this is just conjecture, that Quik scrapped the album that he and Robert were working on and went back and made Safe and Sound.
Yeah, and what a fascinating, just a fascinating myth that goes with, you know, these legends that we love, that have to have this element of myth about them in the 90s, because you watch the Wu-Tang series now on Hulu, and you're like, oh God, yeah, these are all the stories I heard, and now it's dramatized. You could do this with Quik so easily. His life is fascinating, and the more and more I peeled back on this album, generally, I was like, what is his 5 mic? For us, they're called 5 mic moments. You know, a moment of near perfection, or perfection. And I kept going back to Dollars and Cents, and then I kept thinking about Down, Down, Down as well. And I was like, there's stuff on that album that might be perfect. That might just be perfect. And I don't want to be hyperbolic, but Dollars and Cents is probably, I know in Spotify it's his number one, and it's probably his most renowned track. I heard about it quick through that on the Murder Was the Case soundtrack. That's the first time I'd even heard or clocked Quik. and it was my favorite track on the whole. And there's a lot of good tracks on that album. Yeah, I think What Would You Do by Dog Pound on that album as well. Actually, yeah, that was unbelievable as well. But again, you know, these are the moments. I don't know what for you, where you thought Quik's 5 mic moment. Does it come on this record for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say of all the Quik records, I'm not going to rank them here. They're like children for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Never did such a thing. But I rub the head, or I favor these Safe and Sound and Rhythm-al-ism. Those twin records for me are probably his greatest record. Quik Is the Name being my first love because it was my introduction. So I'm I have that. But as far as 5 mic moments go, maybe one of the harshest couplets of all time on Dollars and Cents, EIHT, now should I continue? Yeah, you left out the G because the G ain't in you. That I don't know that there's a more vicious line in all of West Coast rap disses. I mean, yeah, you could point to No Vaseline.
I was going to say, yeah.
You could point to No Vaseline where Ice Cube kind of lets her rip, but like this is so subtle, and you stripped him of the value of his chosen artistic name.
Yeah.
Like he can now, like he can't escape that. Any of the other disses that we would talk about on No Vaseline or on The Chronic, where they're really going in on Eazy-E, he destroyed him in name. And name is so important in rap music.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it makes everything else sound more emphatic. Just like diss records, if you start that fire, like Hit 'Em Up, he started that fire so quick. And I'm not trying to, you know, that resulted in life and death shit. And it shouldn't be easily talked about. This could have quite easily done the same. They're gang culture, gang affiliated people. This could quite easily have ended in MC8 and DJ Quik losing their lives. But if you look at it from a musical standpoint, when he's saying stuff like, now I'm going to boot your motherfucking ass to the moon, as a kid, I was like, oh, like that's such a, not childish, but it's such a basic thing to say. But you've so emphatically said it in the mix with what you've just said. I was like, damn, like, yeah, he absolutely kills that. And I know, and I thank God Jeff Weiss was on here to talk about Sugar Free Street Gospel, because I can see why moments on there could be 5 mic moments, because he's so, like, DJ Quik is so different, like, not different, but just experimental. I don't know the word for it, but, you know, like, just wilding out, just fucking wilding out.
But it's interesting that you isolate that boot your ass to the moon line, because that's preceded by him saying, I'm down with Bloods and I'm down with Death Row.
Yeah.
So he's able to get off an otherwise like kind of laughable line, because he's preceded with like, yeah, if I really do this, it could result in some serious shit.
Yeah. And let's not sleep on the fact that he uses a fucking cowbell. Peak usage of a cowbell in a hip-hop diss record. That's classic West Coast banger. It's like, wow, there's so many moments where he's like, that shouldn't work, but it fucking works. And I was reading how upset, maybe he wasn't this upset, but in text it looked quite upset, that he was talking about the drum break on Dollars and Cents. I don't know if you know about that. You probably do know about this, but he used that same one for Tony, and, you know, Let's Get Down, and me and my wife, we've loved that jam from back in the day. So Quik has infiltrated my marriage, you know, and like, you know, he is that good. Pitch on a Party is another one where, you know, everyone loves that track. But I was thinking that drum break, I didn't know he used the same drum break. And I continued to read the interview, right? And he is fucking fuming. He's like, everyone's nicked that drum break. Everyone. And he's like, even Home Alone with R. Kelly has that drum break. I ain't seen it. Everyone's just capitalizing on my sound and just leave my name off the credits. And I was like, do you know what? This is the problem with being unsung. This is the problem with being, maybe, as you said, overshadowed. People need to, like, no Hearts, like Hearts of Men. That's another track where I was like, yeah, like, again, I heard that was a leftover from this album. And I'm like, if that was on Safe and Sound, like, it's already unbelievable. But the fact that he was like, oh, Safe and Sound is done now. Pac, what do you think? And you're like, damn, this guy was so creative, and he was just giving away, you know, these incredible moments of music. But
Since we're
yeah,
on that, before we get off him giving away incredible moments of music, I mean, and very briefly, I will just use this opportunity to say that for me, "Let's Get Down" is my favorite song of all time. I don't know that there's a more perfect merger of R&B and hip hop. It is endlessly replayable. It interpolates Nirvana and it works.
yeah.
Um,
Think
and then
about that.
the video's phenomenal and was shot in the Bradbury Building in downtown Los Angeles, which is where they shot Blade Runner, or parts of Blade Runner. So there's just like a
Wow.
lot of LA stuff there for me. But in terms of giving away incredible music, this is an opportunity to talk very briefly about Straight Playin' by Shaquille O'Neal, which is one of my favorite DJ Quik songs that plays on the radio on K-Day out here all the time.
Wow.
And that is a phenomenal record that was made, I think that was 97. So that comes in just before, in this period, that Tony,
Mm.
between Safe and Sound, Rhythm-al-ism, in between there. He's making a friggin' hit record for Shaquille O'Neal. And it's phenomenal. I
Yeah.
love it, every second of it. Shaq is some of his best rapping.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he was coached by DJ Quik at some point.
Oh, I would
I
not
don't think
doubt it.
there's anybody that comes on a Quik record that isn't rapping as well as they possibly could have.
Mm. Absolutely. No, and that is another aspect of him. Like on this, he's going into, as we said, Quik's Groove again. That number 3 on this, I know he talks about them all, but I do remember him saying, "That's the most beautiful shit I ever made." And it's like, wow, he is getting to that point now where he's making things. Seems so easy because there's so much of it. I think this album, and I'm trying not to say the word cohesive, but this album is more consistent, I would say, because I can't even think of many skips on this album for me, because it's just so perfectly that you're in a world, you're being treated like you're in that world, and it's fun, and there's beef, and there's dissing, and there's I don't know if there's as much dark stuff on here, but like there's a lot more freestyle stuff, like Sucker Free. Like that one should be a longer track, but the fact that he is just so casually talking to that guy, spit that shit you spit on the phone the other day, drop it right here, and you're like that. As a kid, that world building and that, it felt like Doggy Style. It felt like, that kind of really well produced top to end, and thinking about how this is sequenced. Yeah, I don't know. There's something about it. And then it leads into Rhythm-al-ism, as you said, to contrast it. Yeah.
Yeah. But in terms of like darkness, which you mentioned, there is that, right? Like obviously on Dollars and Cents, like even though it's a fun sounding record and it has potentially life-threatening consequences, Safe and Sound, the title track, is actually a very sad record. He's talking about his biography, about having, lack of money leading to him selling drugs and watching that happen, and selling drugs in order to pay for equipment. And the hook there is actually quite sad. It might not sound that way, like he doesn't deliver it that way. He delivers it with confidence, but he's talking about not believing in God, not having any friends, and not having any lovers, only money. Like money is his only thing. And that, it's interesting because I think he contrasts it later when he gets to Rhythm-al-ism, but that's where he was at in his life. And it's also, and I think it speaks to like just coming up where he came from, where money meant everything because there was so little of it. And also because there was so little of it, then people can do really duplicitous and terrible things in order to take stuff from you. Like he had his equipment jacked, but it's interesting because in his life later on, Quik actually becomes quite benevolent to the point of like, maybe you should stop giving people so much money, because you're not going to have any left.
Yeah.
Kind of, and in much the same way that like, I think, Roger was, Roger Troutman was kind of undone by finances. The circumstances surrounding his death, his brother shooting him, were, from the best of my knowledge, were all about him kind of having run the family money into the ground. And Quik eventually gets there, and also on Safe and Sound, there's just a brilliant use of Talkbox, and I'm a sucker for Talkbox. Every time it comes up, I need it, and Quik always uses it tastefully and very well. And And I've had the opportunity to see him in concert. I'm calculating it 3 times for sure, maybe 4. But he did a series at the Key Club, which is no longer exists in Los Angeles, on Sunset. I believe now it's One Oak. But the Key Club was like an all ages spot. So I was able to get in at 18 and 19. And he was doing a series of concerts where they were just kind of jam sessions. And he would bring in, you know, anybody who was available. Like, I forget which famous female rapper showed up one night, but it was either Lil' Kim or Foxy Brown. I honestly can't remember because it's so long ago. But he would play the talk box. I went to 2 different nights of Quik's Groove at the Key Club, and he would play the talk box for extended periods, just jamming out. And so he really knew how to use that instrument. It was not studio effects. He valued it. And it's so evident. And I have had the opportunity to write about what is called modern funk, which would be, you know, starting with Dame Funk from out here in Pasadena, who kind of goes on. And there's some obvious Roger Troutman ties in Dame Funk's music. And I've been able to talk to probably one of the best keyboardists and you know, talk box users out here in the West Coast, which would be XL Middleton. And we have both commented on just how brilliantly Quik is able to implement that into his music. And that Safe and Sound does that. And the song and the entire record. Yeah,
exactly. And as well as that, you said there, you know, and you know what, I am probably wrong because there is a lot of nihilism in this whole thing. When I can't remember the exact lyric, but it's like, I don't give a all I give a shit about is music and sex. And like
that's Street Level Entrance, and that is the very first thing he says on this album.
That's it, yeah. And it's like a fifth of Remy and some fat ass checks, and you're like, fuck yeah, that's all he wants. And yeah, absolutely. And but to go with that, it's his production level, just wide ranging production level. It's gone so far into this. Well, if you look at Get At Me, that's another one where I was like, that will forever bump in a ride. But it's the way it almost transitions into Digging You Out. It's just fucking incredible how that transitions into that. And then I was like, Something for the Mood with that flute.
Ooh.
And you're in summer, even if you're in winter when you hear that. But it's when you hear stuff that I didn't really enjoy as much as a kid. But when I hear Can I Eat It Now, despite the lyrics, despite all that stuff, although, you know, he's practicing safe sex and all that in a lot of his raps, I would say in that, if just looking at it musically, that is such a strange track musically for me, but it works. It's like, why does that work? But again, it's very hard to articulate, but if you go back and listen to these albums, you'll see what I mean. But were there any moments on it where you think any tracks on here that deserve a bit more shine? As we say, hidden gems and stuff. I know there's an actual hidden gem with Tangeray at the end, but like, is there anything that you think like, yeah, you know, that track needs a bit more?
Before I get into that, I just, since Can I Eat It was just brought up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's aged the worst, which is a question that you asked of me.
Yeah.
You know, before we did this podcast, I was given like a little a questionnaire to kind of guide me, which thank you again. It's very helpful.
Well, good man.
Can I Eat It? Aged terribly, and he kind of, because he's, you know, saying that don't go down on women, which is like, we've finally progressed as a society and as a culture with rap. I say we, I'm a guest in this house, but I'd like to think that I'm a part of it to a degree. And you know, a lot of rappers today are more advocating for oral sex. Like YG, one of his first songs was I'm a Pussy Eater. Like that was one of his earliest songs. So we've come a long way in that respect. And Quik is kind of reneging on what he said on Me Wanna Rip Your Girl from Way Too Funky, where he says he wants to taste it. So he's kind of, you know, something happened to Quik. I don't know if Quik got burnt or what happened to Quik, but he becomes very proactive about safe sex between 92 and 95. Something happened, or someone in Quik's circle, something happened. But Can I Eat It is, you were saying about what works about it musically, and I think it may be his most faithful interpretation of Zap. I don't know if there's another record on there instrumentally that slaps as hard and has the snare that hits that hard. And then the talk box at the end, the kind of like, there's an entire minute at the end of that track. I will listen to all of the unpleasant kind of regressive stuff before it, just for that last minute, which is basically the closest he's ever come to, in my opinion, embodying the spirit of Roger Troutman while also making it his own.
Yeah. Oh man. So there you go. You've nailed it. I was wondering what it was, and it's the Troutman, man. It's Zap. Absolutely. And again, you have the disses, let you have it. Again, you know, even though it is a diss, there's so much funk in that just separated itself from the rest of my listening, despite it still being another diss record. And I'm not saying it was, I used to love diss records as a kid, but it's just one of them things that, you know, lyrically it doesn't enrich me as much nowadays, but I find Quik is a different beast. It's not about that all the time. And just like, I think it's The Hoe in You, which is another one where I was like, look how he's arranged that track, and it's on a rap record like this where you're like, damn, it's just weird. It's like full of gangsterisms, and yet you've got this where he's feels like live composing, you know, these instruments. And yeah, I just find, you know, we can't ever sleep on the fact that he's a musical genius. I think that's the way to put it. Like, you know, you can't pull back from that.
Yeah. And I think that disjunction that you outlined, or that dissonance where it's like there's all this gangster stuff with like this very sweet, soft R&B stuff, I think is kind of inherent in growing up on the West Coast, where you see lowriders going around and you see like kind of the most thugged out people driving those lowriders sometimes, and they're playing oldies. You know, they're playing stuff that's talking about love, that's talking about pain. There's a sadness there. But then they're also like the hardest looking people on earth, with like face tattoos and teardrops and, you know, black and gray tats up and down their arms, you know. And that kind of dissonance, I think, is, even if this isn't exactly that, like he's not creating an oldie track, I think that's, you just absorb that growing up in Los Angeles. Yeah.
Interesting, man. So, I mean, Safe and Sound, as we've said, you know, incredible. There were a few characters in this mix that, I know we've talked about Sugar Free on the pod before, but I was wondering for your thoughts on Marsberg. You know, we talked about him initially a little bit ago. Unfortunately, shot to death affected Quik hugely. For someone like that who was on these albums with Quik, what was it about him for you? Like, how talented was he?
Mossberg, specifically? He's one that, like, kind of like the rest of a lot of the people that like Quik brings in, like when he brings them in, they kind of blend into what he's doing. Like there's rarely, for me, and I don't mean this to diss High C, to diss Second to None, or Play a Ham, or any of those guys, because I can recite their verses. They just don't stand out in a way that like Quik's writing does on the records. And I think it's because he knows the music intimately, and they're coming to the music.
Yeah. Oh, right. Fascinating. Okay. So when it comes to the end of this, you know, his legacy, unless you have anything else you want to say about Rhythm-al-ism, I know we've said a little bit that fourth album. Is there anything else you want to say on Rhythm-al-ism before we move on?
Just that it's criminal that there have been like no retrospectives or documentaries or anything of that kind surrounding the making of that album. You know, talking to El DeBarge and all the people that you could talk to around the making of that record. And Safe and Sound, while we're on it, you know, I pitched a retro 25th anniversary, because that would have been last year, would have been the 25th anniversary of Safe and Sound. And I had pitched that to a place with Fork in the name. They review records. I don't know who they are. And they never responded, which is odd, because and they still haven't reviewed it. So
that's mad. That is mad, isn't it?
It's mad that like there are all these retrospectives, 25s, and Quik is left out again and again and again. This year being the 30th anniversary of Quik Is the Name, and I don't know that we're going to see any of it.
Well, I'm glad we can talk about it now, man, because this is like, when you listen to Rhythm-al-ism, the intro alone should wake you up and think, this is not the same as everyone else. This is very different to everyone else. Medley for a V, another one of those. Obviously, you talked about You're a Gangster, all that. Down, down, down. One of me, 5 Mic moment for me. Like all this stuff that he does and then goes on to do with Truth Hurts and stuff like that. He has this legacy. I think I did read actually something about, he said that Rhythm-al-ism might be his favourite album he's done because it was something like, even though it's all over the place, it still constituted one sound. And I was like, that's a really good way to put it, because that album is so wide ranging, and yet it still is very much on that album. It's of the same, cut from the same cloth as everything else. Really hard to balance that, I imagine, as an artist. I was going to say about his legacy after this 3-album run, after Rhythm-al-ism, what changed for Quik? How did he change in your rotation, your love for him? Like, what changed for him generally in his life?
Well, right, like Rhythm-al-ism, like I was saying, that's the record where he kind of like, he lost people as he was finishing it. And I think he goes into some darker places when he gets into like Balance and Options. And then, Under the Influence, he's like kind of like, the cover is like him, looking like a junkie, and some of the records get a little bit stranger and less cohesive as he goes along, but I think that's because he's pushing himself musically, like I wonder if it was just because he had condensed so much learning into the period between 91 and 98 when Rhythm-al-ism comes out, that he was, at the peak of his powers, so to speak, and then everything after that was him kind of trying to find new ways to do what he'd already done. But there's some fascinating post-Rhythm-al-ism records. I mean, there's stuff on Blackout that just the beats alone are wild. Blackout being, for anyone listening, his album with Corrupt, or even his reprise of Tonight in 2017 on his record with Problem, which was called Rosecrans, is great. And it's a reprise of a record that we've known for decades.
Yeah.
He still has it. I think the problem with talking about his legacy is that I don't know that he's interested in preserving it. And I say that because he doesn't grant interviews. I know his publicist. I've hounded his publicist every year. I will say, if this is the year that he wants to talk, I am here to talk to him. And Quik does not want to do interviews. I've been asking him to do interviews since 2016. So here we are 5 years later. I still don't have a DJ Quik interview. DJ Quik, if you're listening, I hope you liked what I had to say and you're ready to sit down. Because I think, and I've tweeted this, so this is not, something I don't stand behind. As you said earlier, sir, he is the prince of rap music. Like somebody who's constantly pushing themselves, somebody who's going in wild directions that may not always work out, but that are always interesting. Yeah. And rarely is he retreading the same sonic ground. I think I either read something or watched something, or he was just like, I don't repeat drum patterns. Yeah. And that's the only time maybe that Tony Tone record. But other than that, I'd be hard pressed to say like, oh, all these DJ Quik records have similar drum breaks or what have you. And that's because he's programming and, but the gaps between albums get longer. And you have to wonder if it's because he's creatively stifled or if he's, reached the end of his line. Yeah. I think is fair. I think the assumption that people should create art forever or until they die is a wrong one. Sometimes people only have a finite amount of creative abilities within them. And we're lucky that Quik's finite, set of creative talent is was far from finite. It was quite vast. But I think he may, the last record was 2017, and I don't know if we'll ever get another DJ Quik record, and I'm fine if we don't. There's just so much to appreciate, even on the Book of David from like 2011, I believe, which I bought in stores.
Remember that. But this is it, and I think, and as well as you said, he's had tragedy. He can't be well, even he has gone out there and said, but he can't be unaware of, him not getting the plaudits he deserves. He's even said it. I remember when he was like King Kunta, Hot in Here. He was saying there was all these tracks, even I think in the club as well. Like he was like, I've done work on these. I should be credited for these. How much of that are you going to take as an artist until you get to a place where maybe it's not as fulfilling? This is again very much a hypothesis. It's not like just something that you have to take into mind. There has to be something for an artist after a while, and I'm just glad that you can still hear it though. Like no one molded merengue in this stuff, and now you hear and sitars or what sounds like sitars and stuff like that. And I think he has this imprint which is I think just so huge that you may miss it, but you have until you start looking at it, you realize, fuck me, it's vast, everything he did. So Max, I appreciate you bringing these albums on, man, because I've been looking forward to doing this, and the second run of these 3 album runs, just brilliant to go with Quik, because it's just been one I've been chomping at the bit with. So I appreciate you, man, and I appreciate all those points. They were banging, absolutely smashed it.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time here. And one final note on Quik's legacy as it relates to this 3 album run. You don't hear really Dr. Dre using the talk box until 96. Safe and Sound comes out in 95, very much Roger Troutman like, and then Dre recruits Roger Troutman for California Love. And so I think people will often say like, oh, Dre brought Roger Troutman into West Coast rap, in a literal sense, but Quik brought him in a spiritual sense and an influential sense more than anyone. And I would, if I could get our roided out headphone magnate, Dr. Dre, on the phone, I'd be like, so yeah, you listened to Safe and Sound quite a bit before you went in the studio with Pac, right? And interesting side note, Quik appears in the video for the other version of California Love.
He does. He absolutely does.
I wonder if he brokered that meeting between Roger and...
Well, you hear a lot about All Eyes on Me would not be All Eyes on Me without DJ Quik. So it's the engineering alone. Remember, this is a musical genius, man. He can play them instruments. He can, and this is the thing. We all talk about Eric Sermon and put Eric Sermon on these mountaintops, and rightly so. RZA, Dre, Premier, but Quik is absolutely deserving of being at the top with them. And I'm glad that we got to do this. So, man, thank you so much. Where can we find your work, man? And is there anything you'd like to plug, man, for you as you're on?
Sure. Yeah. I'm at VMaxB. THEE Max B on Twitter and on Instagram, and most of my stuff those are public profiles. You can find them. It has links to my website on there, which has some of my collected work. I would really encourage a lot of people listening to go read my most recent piece for The Land magazine, which is run by Jeff Weiss, and that is on Jay Swift, the producer from The Far Side, who I believe doesn't get enough credit for his work on that record. And also that piece is about his struggles over the last 6 years with getting back into the U.S. He was deported in 2015 as a result of some drug charges that erased his status as a green card holder in the U.S. So that piece is really about the horrors of our immigration system and how they've affected somebody who could have had a very incredible, resurgence in the United States if he'd been able to stay, after he'd gotten sober, because he had a long bout with drug addiction. Apart from that, I write a spin column every month, kind of spotlighting new and upcoming rappers that I take great pride in making sure that that I stand behind everyone that I'm writing about, and that it's not because I have a column, but because I want to write about them. And there's some great people that I've covered there, like Young Morpheus. I implore everyone to check out Young Morpheus. Reaper Mook from Long Beach was a recent one. And then I also have a piece coming out, since we're on the West Coast rap tip, on Inhale. That will be in the next issue, the physical print issue of The Land. And Inhale, for anyone who doesn't know, is Nate Dogg's biological son. and he lives in Long Beach, and he's a really talented and you know, makes music in the vein of his father, but also does some really interesting things that his father never did. No disrespect to Nate Dogg, because we could talk about him all day.
Man, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And you know what? Big up on that, because Far Side, everything about that, and I appreciate you actually out there, you know, doing this work. So big yourself up, man. And you talk about Nate Dogg, and I was like, I think, what was that track now? God, it's on Rhythm-al-ism, and I think it might be the Pussy medley.
It is. You are correct.
It is the Nate Dogg hook that needs tons more love. Is that hook? It's unreal. And again, the production of Quik is absolutely unreal on there as well. But yeah, man, I appreciate all the work you're putting in, and I appreciate your love and just passion for this, man. So doors are always open, Max. Man, hopefully we catch you soon. And yeah, thank you again just for your time and passion, my man.
No, thank you for having me. It was a great pleasure.
Wicked. Thank you, bro. Peace.